Hello and welcome back to another game. Again, I messed up my recording of this game, so gonna have to post-commentate on it. I had the audio file. I was tempted to try and overlay the moves over the top, but I think it's just gonna be simpler to do a fresh cut of this game, although it won't be live. So I had the white pieces here against 1700, and started off with my standard knight c3. We got a standard response e5, which meant I could push with knight f3. So the idea being getting these two knights out is that there's no forward push because knight covers it, and it kind of gets you out of theory. Normally if you're playing e4, you're not expecting just to place two knights with nothing in the centre. So knight c6 seems like the most principled way of defending against it if you can't push, and I can strike now with d4. So it's a kind of Scandinavian style structure where it invites you to trade, and white gets a big advantage if that's what happens. So we see ed and knight takes, and now I've got two knights in the centre, and black's only got one, so usual moves of kind of developing. If you take, I get a queen into the centre, and you've traded off your active piece and gives me a tempo up with my queen that you can't really actively kick it out. So, and black played h6 here, which I knew mustn't be the right move. It just seemed too slow. I'm not threatening to go here with my bishop just yet, so I didn't think this move achieved a lock and just kind of passed me a tempo to do as I wanted. So I don't really want to trade here and open things up. I mean, I could trade, take the queens off, but I think I want to try and keep an advantage, and e4 seems the most principled way. It kind of gives me scope to bring out this bishop, and again keeps control of the centre. Seeing him take me on d4, I was quite happy with this. He's traded off his only active piece, the knight, and allows me to recapture with my queen. So now if we look at the centre, I've got a knight, queen and a pawn. He's got every piece back where it started apart from his h6 pawn. So I thought I must have a reasonable advantage at this stage, and the opening's kind of gone well in the first 6 moves, which is why I like playing this opening. c5 is interesting. The only way to try and kick the queen was to play this move, but I was again quite happy to see this. So after I move my queen, there's going to be some long-term pressure on this d7 pawn. It's not got its ability to come up and trade itself off just yet. So one of the plans will be to try and play d5 and exchange it for my e-pawn so that he's not got a backwards pawn. But in the interim, he's going to be sat there as a bit of a target, and I currently occupy d5 3 times with my queen, knight and pawn. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge for him to try and defend his d7 pawn in the long term. So I was thinking, where do I want to put my queen back to? Because I want access for my bishops to get out, and if I put it back to any of these squares, it's going to at least blunt one of my bishops. So I looked at these squares and blocking in the bishop, and then I also thought, well, in a kind of standard Scandinavian, you come over to the edges of the board, and I thought I'm reasonably safe on a4. I've got to be a bit careful of these pawns coming if I've got my queen over here, but it's going to take him a few moves to do that, like 1 and 2 to do that. But in the event of going over here and 1, 2, he doesn't have that because my knight will take, and there's no way you can take the knight back because the rook hangs. So he's got to spend an extra move getting the bishop out. So I thought I had a good few tempo of getting my queen over here, and I had eyes on this now weak c7 square, limiting the scope of the d7 pawn and kind of getting some bishops out to put some pressure on his position. And I thought maybe doubling up here would be quite useful as well. The other advantage to coming over to a4 is that it pins the d7 pawn, so there's no easy way for him to move it forward. And I was thinking, well, your pieces get a bit stuck now. If you want to develop, you've got to really go out this way, and this d7 pawn's going to have a tough time of it. So I eventually settled on queen a4, and then we had a6. So I was expecting this kind of theme to come, but like I say, you don't have b5 because I take with the knight or the bishop, and you can't take back whilst your rook hangs. So you're going to have to spend some time doing this before you can then push it again. So that's what, 1, 2, 3 more moves, and I thought I could get some good activity in that time. So now I'm thinking there's a couple of soft squares in black's position now. I can jump my knight in straight away and try and target some of these, but given that the queen defends against that, it's not quite ready. But I was thinking, I can get my bishop out here, and then I've got the option of my knight jumping in this way or this way, because like I say, this pawn can't take, so I've got two routes to get in my my knight in here for check, and the rook doesn't really have any escape squares, because usually you try and move your rook out of the way, but with the bishop here piercing down on it, the rook's kind of a bit stuck for squares. So I kind of liked bishop out here. Other candidate move is trying to just get the bishop out and defend, whether it's just putting it on e2 to stop any pin lines here, potentially d3 but it's blunted behind its own pawn, or maybe c4, but again it's long term, could be under pressure here. So yeah, brought the bishop out. I thought going to gain the most activity of being able to get my knights where I want them, and again all that black's got is 3 pawns that he's pushed, and one's on the a file, one's on the h file. Black put his knight in the way on knight e7, I think defending against my knight coming here into forking, but probably missing the fact that my knight could go this way in. So I was kind of excited here that I thought I was in with winning material. So when knight jumps in, I'm threatening, well, firstly a checkmate here, also to put bishop here and win the queen. So there's a lot of threats, and there's no escape squares for his king to go. His rook can't move or do anything useful. So I thought when the knight goes here, we're forced to go into some line where I pick up a rook in the corner. So I went for knight b5, and like I say, threatening mate in 1. You've got to do something to prevent against it. You don't have knight here. You kind of need to stop all the threats as well, with the bishop coming in, the knight going in there and winning a queen. So the only thing you can do is take the knight. So we're up an exchange on move 10. I'm feeling pretty good about our position. We've also got some pressure here with the bishop, and this bishop's pretty stuck as well. Like, you're going to take some moves to develop your bishop out. That will allow a queen trade, or you're going this way. But again, like, how are you going to get that bishop out? It's going to be a bit of a challenge. So it's feeling really good about life at this stage. Brings his knight to g6, just develop the knight, attack the bishop. I was kind of contemplating, do I want to drop it back? Maybe I want to defend it with the queen and then kind of allow a trade given I'm up. But I was thinking, if I drop it back, his knight doesn't have any great squares, does it? It can either go back to where it came from, and its forward squares will block by the bishop. So the bishop's blocking that square, it will block that square, and it will block that square, and you can't go back here. So I think sliding back made the most sense to put the most pressure on the knight. So I went back to g3. His next developing move, I think he's just got to try and get his pieces out, free up his bishops and put some pressure on my queen. So his next move, bishop e7, made a bit of sense. It did mean that he dropped his b5 pawn. He kind of gave that up for development. So now I was trying to contemplate, do I need to take the pawn? Do I want to take the pawn? What else could I be doing that's fairly active? I'm trying to think, or do I want to play queen here and threaten to trap it or trade it? But in the end, I think taking the pawn makes the most sense. Got up some more material, develops the bishops, and prepares myself to castle. I wasn't worried about any counterplay with the queen because I had my queen coming back to defend. So he gets castled now and starting to fix some of his problems, but the material-wise, he's down to 6 pawns. I've got 7, so I'm up a pawn plus the exchange, and these pawns are still going to be a bit of a pain to try and get moving for him. I was trying to think what's best to do here. I've got this passed a pawn, which I can try and run down the board at some point, but I think castling here makes the most sense. I'm also looking at ways of trying to get my queen out, because I don't want to end up in a position where this pawn starts moving, the queen's out, and my queen starts getting trapped there. So I was expecting his queen to come here in the next couple of moves, and I'm having to retreat here with mine, but I didn't know whether to go there preemptively or wait until it was pressured by queen b6. So I castled, and yeah, I suppose it was a question about whether short or long. I suppose short had some advantages that it's the same side, castling, but long, like I say, long term, even before I went up the exchange, this pressure and this pawn I was trying to play against, and I think castling long allowed me to kind of solve a couple of my problems. Now with queen here, it's no longer hitting the pawn behind it because the king defends it. I've got good scope for launching these pawns up the board, and he's got limited to throw back at me, and also this pin's really annoying as well, so it kind of just makes it difficult for him to untangle. d6, trying to get the bishop out this way and the queen out this way. It does mean his rook can't come here to try and oppose this pawn and get on this diagonal because the bishop's there, but kind of cuts off my circulation with this piece here. I think probably queen here would pick up the pawn, would it? I'm trying to, maybe queen there. Certainly close to picking it up. Yeah, the other bit that I kind of had to semi-watch out for was like some checks along this line, king moving, and then bishop at some point in the future coming over here, and some discoveries on my queen. But I was a few moves away from that. Drop my bishop back. I knew the queen was coming out. I wanted to kind of lock down his d5 push, and I wasn't so fussed if his rook comes over here. I can kind of either land my bishop in here. I've always got the ability to go back. I want to play my king over at some point. I want to double up my rooks. I want to get my queen back. They're my ideas in this position. So queen comes out, but again pins itself behind the bishop. But I know what's coming next is this coming out with the discovery. So I have to be a bit careful in this position. So bishop g3, bishop g4 is a threat, attacking the rook, but also uncovering attack on my queen. So I think now's the time for me to get my queen out of there, so that these discoveries don't come with any tempo. Or I can contemplate playing f3 to block the bishop coming out. So yeah, move the queen out of the way so there's no discoveries. This now comes with a bit of tempo, but I was trying to escape my queen round to here anyway, have this long-term pressure on f7 I was now targeting, so that if the rook ever moves, f7's going to fall, and if the longer that the rook's staying there, the less activity he's going to have. So I was fine with him having the tempo with bishop d7, because I wanted to play queen b3 anyway. So now his rook's tied down. He doesn't have this yet, although it might be an interesting idea just to kind of free up and give him some activity. So I was looking at b5 to deflect my bishop, maybe bring a rook over, but I kind of calculated that was fine for me. It doesn't really have much of a push with d5, so I was kind of thinking, oh, is he going to play some check ideas over here? Maybe he's going to move the bishop over there. But he did go for b5, which was kind of interesting. One hand I could drop the bishop back, but that doesn't make much sense. I think if I'm going to move the bishop, it should be to take, but I've got to be careful about the rook coming over and pinning. But I concluded I was fine because I've got both the a pawn and the c pawn to defend my bishop in those lines, and there's no way to dislodge it. And whilst it's a bit ugly throwing the pawns forward in front of my king, and particularly if it's the c pawn, opening myself up to these, I've got a queen and a rook and a couple of bishops around to protect me, and if needs be I can sack one of my rooks back for one of the pieces. So I was happy to take with the bishop. I thought the only logical move really is to go back with the rook. If you're trading here, I don't think that's going to be too great for you. Although maybe you could trade first, then play rook over, and then when the queen moves you've got some pressure here, but I think I'm always able to diffuse things. I could always play like c3, or maybe even just push the pawn and sack a pawn or something in that line. But he went rook over first, and now I had the decision about whether to play a4 to protect the bishop or c4 to protect the bishop. I thought they both had pros and cons. Like a4 protects the bishop and threatens to push it in the long term, but what I was nervous about was playing a4, it being traded, and then black being able to come down the a file. So that made me lean towards c4. So if it's traded this way, the a file remains closed, it's just the c file that's opened. But the downside to playing that is that there's now issues for my king with both these diagonals being opened. But I thought c4 was the lesser of two evils, so I went for that. He played bishop e6. I think he's just trying to see if he can cause some problems now by bringing his pieces in. Like, there could be some sacrifices at some times that could work. If my queen moves away, like taking here, and I don't know, having your queen over here and coming down for mate. So I had to be semi-careful with this. Wanted to start moving my queen out of the pin zone. I kind of like the structure with a4 as well to kind of cement my bishop in and prevent any kind of tactics. And then longer term, once I'm secure over here, find a safe spot for my king. So whether it's doing this kind of structure with the pawns, finding my king somewhere over this side in this box will be where I want to put my king. Or I still have the option of bringing a rook over here and running away this side with my king. But I started with queen d3, get out the pin. I thought was the most important bit. I didn't want to go too far away. I still wanted my queen to be nearby in case things were needed, and still got half an eye on, you know, like checks here, king moving away, and this kind of line with the diagonal. Comes up with the rook. I don't think it's doing an awful lot. It's just kind of protecting the pawn here, because I was now attacking it 3 times with my bishop, queen and rook, so you have to defend it a 3rd time as well. I don't know if that's such a major idea of mine. I can now play a4, again twofold, really lock in this bishop, and also start playing a5, a4 in the future. a4 coming with a kickback that allows me to pick up a pawn here. So he comes in with the knight, and I was thinking there's two attackers on this pawn. Do I give up my bishop pair to try and get rid of it? If I move my queen, where makes the most sense to put it? I think I'd keep it somewhere close by in case it's needed, but start to feel a bit vulnerable if it comes over. There could be some sacrifices starting to emerge. So was happy enough just to eliminate that knight. Takes back. I've now got an open d file for my extra rook to go through. I've traded off a piece, but I've got to be careful of these diagonals. So move the queen over. I don't want the rook coming over here and causing some problems. I want to kind of tie his queen down, and I think ultimately I want to have some infiltration squares for my rooks. So my current plan is try and get doubled, like bring a bishop into here to trade that off, and cover off some of these diagonal lines as well with my pawns if I can. Played f6, which I didn't really get. It kind of blunts his bishop. I mean, yes, it defends your e5 pawn, but I thought there's better ways of doing this. And it does mean your queen can now move, but I thought this was a bit slow playing f6. So I start on my plan of doubling. So I start with rook d3. I didn't want to put it on the dark squares and have all of these on the dark squares and open myself up for pins. So started off with rook d3. He then played f5 after playing f6, which seemed again like a bit of a waste of tempo. If anything, he should have played f5 all in one go, because any trade here brings this bishop alive and kind of catches me out with my king. So I don't want to trade. I don't think, even though it deflects the bishop and I could maybe put it up here to try and win a pawn, I think the gain he gets to the diagonals wasn't worth it. So I played f3 to shut down that diagonal. So now any trade, I've got a pawn there. Whilst it's a weak pawn and can be targeted with his queen and maybe the bishop, I thought I've always got time to defend it. Any loss of here will come with trades, which I'm happy to make, and in the short term it really protects this diagonal. So was happy to block with f3, was happy to see it get traded. So now I've got the pawn there blocking the diagonal. I've got the f file to work with now as well, which could become useful in the future, although it does mean I'm struggling to defend some of these diagonals. So bishop g4, which was a good useful move. I was kind of seeing if the bishop comes to e2, I can't kick it away with either of these squares because then this bishop comes in there. So I kind of got to be a bit careful about what I'm doing and how I'm trying to kick it away. Because similarly, like h3, bishop comes in. Where am I going to go? Am I going here? Is that my only square? Oh, I can maybe go all the way up, but I was most nervous about the dark squared bishop infiltrating, so played h4 to stop that. So now there's no bishop coming here. It does mean I'm struggling to kick away the light squared bishop, but I thought the dark squared one is the more pressing one to deal with at this time. He then goes back, and then I want to ultimately get my rooks doubled. I don't want to drop the pawn and allow him to come back, so I don't want him to trade and then come back, so just played g3 to short my position. I think I've got a reasonable amount of time to do stuff. He's just kind of moving around. I can still improve my position further by playing like moves like this and getting my king safe. I can take control of this file. I can double on the d file, try and find some infiltration points. Bishop now goes back to g4. I think he's just kind of shuffling around waiting for me to do something at this point. And he's again stopping me from doubling, I suppose, on the d1 square. So I try and lift up this way, given that I've closed off this diagonal. I thought this was safe to come around this way. And then he puts his rook on d6 to offer the trade. And I think he's thinking if we trade here, he's got some pressure with his queen coming around. So I wasn't going to take him. If anything, I was going to let him take me. But I saw that this pawn is now no longer defended, and if I take it, whilst my rook is hanging, his queen would be hanging, and he can't get away with it because it's not a mate with rook back there because I've got king up and there's no follow-ups for him. So I concluded that queen takes e5 was safe enough to play, and I could kind of get away with it. And now, hopefully, we'll try and get in for some mass trades. I can get rid of the rook. If I take the rook, he's got to take with the bishop to avoid a queen trade. So I was feeling pretty good about that. Yeah, and then king comes in closer to f7. I think at this point I probably had a minute or two left. I saw that I must be able to win. I thought I was going to be able to win a piece with queen f4 check, because there'd be some line where the king would have to move or the bishop comes up. I would trade with some way, and then I'd pick up the bishop at the end, but I wasn't quite sure then if his queen's here, if he was going to get some infiltration on it. So I just played it simple, brought my rook in to give a check on f2 first. I was like, getting the rook in has got to be advantageous. And then when he goes back, I was just on simplification mode. I was like, if I can start trading things, that's got to be good for me. I'd seen that he could only really take with the bishop in this scenario. We were going to get some checks in. Maybe we can start trading pieces off. So he takes with the bishop. And now again, I'm running a bit low on time. I'm looking at checks here. Maybe a check here does some useful things. I think going around this way, trying to trade off queens, I'd feel a lot happier about my position. So go queen d5 check, and then the king comes up. And now, yeah, do I go here to try and trade off queens? I've also got rook up, which I like the look of. It was just difficult that his bishops are covering all the key squares around his king, of how I go about doing this. I think if I had more time, I'd have seen things like e5 trading, and then I can play queen there to pick up the bishop, stuff like that. There's lots of wins all over the board, and I'd already declined picking up this bishop earlier on, but they still existed. I just wanted to simplify down because there's no way you're stopping this a pawn, and I've kind of up multiple boards and an exchange. I went rook f7. I thought it kind of looked natural. Didn't see a great square for his queen to go to. Stops him getting more active with his queen, and he's always tied down to that bishop. This move, I presume, is a blunder. Maybe he was just always going to take that one. Maybe he forgot that his queen was hanging. I'm not quite sure, but we picked up the queen on c7, and I was like, oh, this game is pretty close to being done now. Bishop gave me a check, moved over to b1, and yeah, at this point he resigned. Like, can pick up the rook back there, but it's pretty done at this point. So it was a pretty good game. There was some stuff towards the end where it could have been clean. I could have picked up another piece, but I don't think I ever got into any major trouble. So it was a good game. Thanks for watching.